We are super pumped to have Fadi from the Great Chocolate Showdown. Casey, I don't know if you wanted to add a little intro or bio, but Fadi is multifaceted. I think just what I've heard through the grapevine, is on the front lines right now during COVID, helping care for our community. He's also a lawyer and also bakes. So I don't know how he does it all, but I would love if you could sort of tell us a little bit about your background and history, sort of what helped you fall in love with food and the cultural aspects behind that. And we're so glad to have you. So take it away.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey, Priya. I'm super excited to be here. So my background is I grew up most of my life in the States, but I lived a portion of my life in the Middle East, specifically Jordan and Palestine. So the dish that I'm bringing today is actually a dessert that we have for the holiday. Muslims around the world just celebrated the end of Ramadan, which is our religious observance, and it ends with a holiday called Eid al-Fitr, which means the holiday of breaking fast. And so this dessert comes from my part of the world, and it's something that we specifically just have on holidays. So I'm very excited to make it because I really want to eat it. My whole philosophy on food is that food is a universal truth. Everything that's alive eats, whether it's plants or microorganisms or animals or humans. So it's one of the universal equalizers. So that's how I approach food. It's all about texture and flavor, and there is no real rules as long as it just kind of tastes good and appeals to you. What does it matter, right? So the most difficult part of today's recipe is just going to be saying the name of the recipe. Okay, it's called ma'moul. Okay, ma'moul, like obviously there's a letter in there that is non-existent in English, so don't worry about it. You can call it mamoul, whatever works for you. Okay, so we're gonna start here. I have 450 grams of flour in here. If you're gonna use a food processor, you don't have to sift your flour at all. But I'm not gonna use a food processor to show you how it's all done by hand in case you don't have any tools.
You happen to have that in cups, 450 grams?
Yes, it is 3 cups of flour. And then I have 2 teaspoons of baking powder that I'm just gonna put right in there. And so I have 2 tablespoons of sugar and a pinch of salt. So something I learned from Anna Olson, don't sift sugar and salt because they're dissolvable. They will essentially dissipate as you bake, so you don't have to worry about big granules, okay? So these will just go right in there. All right, we're gonna sift. Just make sure we don't have any lumps like these. We'll just push those through. And that's done, okay? All right, from here, we're gonna add, you can choose, I have almond extract here. You can do vanilla. You can do, if you have it, but I highly doubt you will, mahlab. Mahlab is by far one of my favorite ingredients. It's basically the pits of sour cherries, and it has a very bitter amaretto flavor profile. That's why this is a really good substitute. So I'm gonna use this just to keep with tradition because I'm also gonna eat these, so I want it.
Where might we find that?
I will find out, but basically Middle Eastern stores would carry this. Like the Hadis in Brooklyn would probably have it.
Now, if we're trying to evoke like a cherry flavor and we happen to have like I have Luxardo cherries, can we put in a little syrup or?
No, because you don't want to add moisture. Yeah, you don't add moisture. So what I'm going to do is just add a teaspoon of this directly in here. Instead, so the flavor profile of mahlab is very, very similar to almond extract. So you can use 2 teaspoons of almond extract instead as a substitute.
Perfect.
You know what? I really like this stuff, so I'm just going to go ahead and freestyle that a little bit. Add a little more. Okay, so from here, I'm gonna go ahead and add my melted ghee. So as previously explained, ghee is basically clarified butter. It's butter that has been processed where all the milk solids and milk fats have been removed to give it a much purer, richer flavor. Okay, this is about, let me see, I have 100 grams, which is half a cup, okay? So we're just gonna go ahead and pour this in. You can melt it in the microwave, 30-second burst, and it'll melt. You can also use butter. If you like the flavor of olive oil, you could do olive oil. We're just gonna mix this up, and it's gonna turn into like a sand-like consistency. And what we're gonna do, like, it's gonna be very dry at the moment, but we're gonna add some water to it, okay? So with the water, I don't recommend ever pouring a whole amount of water. So the amount of water I have here is 2/3 of a cup, okay? We're just gonna slowly start drizzling it in. It's kind of the same concept as if you're making pie crust. You just want the water to bring it all together. You don't want it to overwhelm it or get like into a soggy mess. All right, so I personally really believe in the importance of touching your food because I think you infuse it with energy. And that's why if you're in a bad mood, probably don't cook. Take some takeout. We're just gonna keep pouring this in until it gets, you can already tell that it's starting to come together. And I'm just kind of like grabbing the dough and pinching it. I don't want to overwork the flour, which basically means touching it and handling it way too much. What happens is you build up the protein in flour, which is called gluten, and it makes for a very tough dough. The same rule applies in terms of water. Just like you don't want to oversaturate it, you also don't want it to be too dry. So you can also add a little bit more water until it comes together. Okay, so just so y'all know, traditionally, this dough is actually made out of semolina, which is a very common Mediterranean grain. It's often used in pasta. That's where it's more commonly used in the Western world. But in the Middle East, we use it a lot for our desserts. It has like almost like a sandy texture, and it holds its shape really well. So you can actually mold it before you bake it, and then as it bakes, it doesn't lose the shape you created. So this is pretty good. It's a little on the dry side, so I think I'm gonna add a little bit more water to it. All right, this is looking pretty good to me now. I don't want it to get too messy. So I'm just gonna let it sit and rest, and now we're gonna work on our filling, okay? By the way, baker's tip, always have a towel nearby. I always have one on my shoulder so that when I'm done with my hands, I can just wipe it down and keep moving forward. The dates that I'm using are these, let me see if I can find this. Sorry guys, I'm like working backwards. They're jumbo Mejdal dates. They're like my favorite. They're really large and they're really delicious. You just have to pit them, so make sure that you take out the seed before you actually try and go with a knife. So again, because I'm not using a food processor, if you are, it's just like the previous demonstration. You just pop it in the food processor with a little bit of fat, either like coconut oil or ghee or whatever you're gonna use. And then you're just gonna process it until it comes together into like a ball. So for me, since I'm not using the food processor, this is a tip that I would highly recommend. If you have like a nonstick spray, spray the actual blade of the knife so that the dates don't stick to the knife as you're chopping them. Don't spray the hilt. Don't spray the upper part of the knife, because this is actually where you should grab your knife so that you can control it better. If you're only grabbing from the hilt, you don't have as much control. You want to imagine that the blade is a part of your arm. Okay, so this is all, it's basically like a long finger. All right, and you're just going to bring your dates into the center and you're just going to rough chop. Doesn't have to be pretty. We're just trying to help them along so that when we cook them, the fibers in the dates break down a little bit faster. That's all we're doing. See, I'm like, it's not sticking as much, and it's just a simple push and they're off the blade. I'm just gonna run the knife through a few times. That to me looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfect. These are ready for processing. So this is about, I want to say I use about like 15 or 16 dates. It's, I think like 7 ounces of dates, just in case you're wondering. This is 25 grams of ghee that I'm going to add to the dates when I cook them down. It's really like, I would say it's probably about 2.5, maybe 3 tablespoons. And again, you can use whatever fat you like. You can use coconut oil, you can use vegetable oil, you can use whatever you like if you want to add a different flavor profile, or you want to make it a little less fatty, which is fine too. So these are going to go into my frying pan. Let me grab it. Break these up. I'll add the ghee. And I'm a huge fan of ground cloves. Okay, so obviously I use bulk spices because I use a lot of spices, so it ends up in whatever jar I have available. So I'm gonna do, since I really like the flavor a lot, I'm gonna start with 1 teaspoon, and then I'm gonna add if I want to, because you can never take away spice, but you can always add as you're cooking. So just, you don't want to overwhelm the palate, okay? All right, I'm gonna put it on like medium high, and I'm gonna do the same process that was shown earlier. Just gonna push it down into the pan, get the ghee to melt. And what we're trying to do in this process is we're just helping the dates break down with the heat. So that way we're expediting the process. We're not waiting for a really long time. And the goal is basically to like get them, instead of from like individual pieces like this, into more of like a cohesive whole. Think Play-Doh is actually a really good, yeah, like they were on the money. Yeah, like they nailed it. Play-Doh is definitely a good way to think about it. Dates absolutely do not need any sugar. Don't add sugar. They are already crazy sweet. That's one of the beauties of dates. I would actually suggest maybe a sprinkle of salt, because a lot of people don't know this, but salt actually brings out sugar. They're basically partners in crime. So like when one of them is overpowering the other, you counterbalance by adding the other one instead. And the same thing goes, by the way, with savory food. If your food is too bitter or too tart, or like your palate is just like cringing, add some sugar. Sugar will actually counterbalance it. It's also a good way to not throw away food. That brings me to something, while this is doing its thing, I want to bring another pro tip to the equation. If there are ever only 2 tools, that you purchase for your kitchen, these are the 2 I recommend. Get a super cheap oven thermometer, because you can never trust the digital thermometer on your oven. It will tell you something. I will tell you now, my oven says 350. I guarantee you it's at 325 or 315, okay? This was $10 on Amazon, super cheap. The other is a digital scale. If you want to start baking with more consistent results, use weights and not volume. Because, and you can test this out, you can actually measure out 3 cups of flour 2 or 3 different times, and then weigh out the flour, and it'll be different results every single time. All right, now we're cooking. So that was, I definitely wanted to bring that to the table. Go get an oven thermometer. It will seriously change your baking life. So this is starting to get really fragrant. I'm gonna like bring you guys in for a view.
Ooh.
And it's starting to break down. Like you can see the skins are starting to break down, and it's turning this really deep brown color. I'm just kind of like poking at it and pressing it against the bottom of the skillet to like help by adding more heat to it. It's just about like maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on like your heat source and the dates themselves. So there's actually another, if you end up in the Middle Eastern store, they actually sell dates specifically called baking dates, and they've already been pitted and processed into that paste form that you want. So you literally take it out of the package, season it, and go ahead and use it. Okay, so the dates are done. All I'm gonna do is transfer them from the frying pan into a bowl, and I'm just gonna pop them in the fridge to help cool them down faster so that we can handle them with ease, okay? All right, we got our dough done, our filling done. All right, so while that cools, we're gonna go back to our dough and we're gonna portion it out, okay? So this recipe actually makes about 30 cookies. So that's about 26 grams of cookie. No, I know this specifically because I actually did the math, because I can be really compulsive when I bake. I like it, okay? So if our dough feels a little sticky, like right here, it's a little wetter than it is here. It just isn't mixed very well. I wouldn't worry about that. But if it's too sticky, you can just add a little bit more flour to coat it. It's not a big deal. I'm gonna actually just go ahead, take a bunch, put it on there. This is like 30 grams, that's close enough. I'm just gonna do a few because I prepped some yesterday. So this is about the size that you're looking for. It's the size of like an unshelled walnut. So like if it's sitting in the palm of my hand, it's not like massive. It's like maybe the size of an egg, I would say. It's probably a good comparison. And what you're gonna do is you're just gonna measure these out and you're gonna lay them on your baking sheet while it cools, okay? So I have a few here that I made yesterday. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take our dough, and I have some, this is basically what the date paste ends up looking like after it's cooled down. So it went from being dates, and you can actually, what my mom used to do is she would portion out the dough, and then she would actually portion out the dates as well. So she would just like cut it off, make it into a small ball, and then this will serve as our filling, okay? There we go. So take your dough, we're gonna spread it out with our fingers, make it into a disc, and then we're gonna set it in the palm of our hand. We're gonna take our date, just gonna press it right in the center, and then you're gonna envelop it. Try and close the seam as best as you can. That's it. You want to bake them seam side down. So I want to show you guys something. I know you guys probably don't have these at home, but I wanted to just bring them so you could see. So you can design these however you like. Some people like them plain like this. Some people might put a finger in the middle and just kind of create like an indentation. Some people will actually like use clips and like create like elevations just to kind of create a design. And you can decorate them with like sesame seeds or black sesame or whatever you'd like. You could put a chocolate chip on there. You could put chocolate chips inside of it. You could do whatever you want. But what I really want to show you guys is in the Middle East, the way we do them. By the way, I want to show you guys one thing. This lump of flour is because I didn't actually sift my flour when I did it the first time. So this is what'll happen. You'll end up with like these weird lumps that kind of collected the ghee, but didn't get incorporated. It's not gonna taste bad, but it is noticeable as you eat it. And you can fill the ma'moul with about like a teaspoon of date filling, like a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. These are actually the molds that we use for the cookies. This mold, the wooden one, has been in my family for as long as I've been around. So this has been with my mom since '83. So it is almost 37 years old. And it's still by far my favorite, even though it's like a super janky design, which I don't love, but I just love the sentiment behind it. So all you do is you go seam side up, you press it in, and then you just tap and it comes out. And then the design is imprinted on it. There it is. There we go. And so this one, like, it incorporates basically each design represents a different filling so that you know just from looking at it exactly what's in it. Typically the domed ones are pistachio, these are typically walnut, and then these are typically date. So that way you have them all in one. All right, we're gonna just do a bunch of these. And then once you have your cookies filled and placed on your tray, you just kind of want them to rest for about 30 minutes before you bake them. You can definitely bake them right off the bat. They might end up being a little bit tougher and closer to a bread consistency, which is totally fine. Filled, like date stuffed bread is delicious. Or you can wait, and it basically, all the baking powder allows it to leaven a little bit, and then it gets a little bit softer, like a softer bite. okay? And what you end up with is this. And at the very end, we literally just decorate it. Once they cool off, they come out really soft. Once they cool off, they harden. So it's not like a chewy cookie. It's also not a hard, crisp snap cookie. Like it's not like a ginger snap. It's somewhere in between. And you literally just sprinkle some powdered sugar on top of it. And the reason why we do powdered sugar is because the dough itself is not very sweet. Since dates are super duper sweet, we don't actually want like a super sweet dough. This just gives it that little extra kick. And you can actually cover it with a mixture of cocoa powder and powdered sugar. You could do cinnamon powdered sugar. You could do any, like anise, like ground anise, which is like another flavor profile. Whatever you're interested in doing, and I strongly encourage you to experiment. That is the fun of baking, because you might end up landing on something that you never imagined would have been delicious. And, moment of truth, break into it. You have your date filling, and it's super delicious. And I'm really happy I can eat during the daytime. It's awesome. I am going to send Casey some information like about how Muslims celebrate with different types of food for the holiday. And then hopefully that'll expand your culinary horizons, or at least interest.